Welcome, my friends. A bank robbery like no other you've ever heard of. The protagonist is Philip Johnson. The way the robbery was carried out left the police and investigators baffled. What's strange about this genius operation is that it wasn't executed from the outside like most robberies, but from within the bank itself. Experts considered it the first of its kind in the history of robberies in the U.S., and it inspired many famous heist and escape movies. The perplexing question I will answer in this video is, how did Philip plan and execute this complex operation, and how did he escape? Philip was a man in his 30s, working for a company called Loomis Fargo, which mainly served various city stores. The services it provided were collecting money and deposits at the end of each day, transporting them in armored trucks, and safely storing them in the company's vaults without any risk. As we know, the phenomenon of bank and money robberies is widespread in American society, often accompanied by dangerous and advanced weapons, with a high likelihood of loss of life. Philip's job was the most difficult and dangerous, transporting large bags of money from the stores to the armored truck in broad daylight, exposing himself to the risk of being killed without mercy. However, things were different with this company. Philip was paid only $7 per hour, which meant that even if he worked 8 hours, he would only earn $56, a very meager amount for living in a country like the US. This wage came with no health insurance or retirement benefits, and the lack of advantages sparked the first idea of planning a robbery. Philip spent the last 5 years of his job carefully planning this heist. His target wasn't a home or a store, but a security company whose main goal was to protect the very money he wanted to steal. Although he had worked there for 10 years and knew the facilities, entrances, exits, and the people working there, the plan had to be flawless. The place was full of surveillance cameras, guards, and firearms. The most crucial element of Philip's plan was timing, which he meticulously chose. He decided that the perfect day would be just before spring break, when the deposits were at their highest and security was less intense. On Saturday, March 29th, the day at Loomis Fargo began like any other. Early in the morning, Philip and his colleague left in the company's truck to make their usual rounds of the area's stores and collect their deposits. By evening, their truck was full of money and checks. After passing through the main gate, they stopped at the guard post for a routine check. The guard verified their identities and the trucks, the green light came on, and the barrier lifted, allowing the truck to enter the company's premises. They parked in the basement and, with the help of their colleagues, began unloading the heavy load of money, worth millions of dollars, onto hand carts. Philip was assigned the task of delivering the money-filled carts to the main vault, which was guarded by 2 men, Terry James Brown and Dan Smith, who had been Philip's colleagues for 2 years. Philip delivered the first cart and looked at his watch to check if it was time for the operation, but he couldn't act just yet. He had to complete the tasks of delivering the remaining carts and helping his colleagues unload them without raising any suspicion. When Philip delivered the last cart, he looked at the wall clock, which was approaching 7 p.m. At that moment, Philip felt that his loyalty to the company had ended. While Terry and Dan were busy moving and storing the money, Philip quietly left the company's basement and went to his car. He opened the trunk, took out a bag, and returned to the vault. Entering the room, he placed the bag on the floor and approached a table where Smith had left his belt and gun. Philip grabbed the gun and walked up to Terry, unnoticed, placing the gun at the back of Terry's head and ordering him to put his hands behind his head, leaving the 2 men in shock. Philip immediately took Terry's gun and pointed it at Smith, ordering them both to lie on the floor. He then pushed the bag towards Terry, instructing him to handcuff each other and lie next to each other. Once Philip ensured they couldn't move, he left the room, went outside, and drove a truck to the storage area, where the vaults were still open. Inside were various stacks of money. Philip filled the empty carts with money in denominations of $10 and higher, pulling them to his truck. The process of loading half a ton of cash valued later at $18.8 million, took 2 full hours. Philip wasn't concerned about the time, since he knew no one would enter the company until the morning. Once he finished loading the carts, he took his 2 hostages at gunpoint to the back of the truck. Philip drove the truck to the north of the city, stopping on Sunday morning at an unknown location, where he unloaded the money. Dan, blindfolded, couldn't determine their exact location. They continued on foot until they reached a wooded area in the Blue Ridge Mountains near North Carolina, where Philip tied his hostage to a tree trunk and left him. That morning, when the employees arrived at the company, they couldn't enter because the doors were locked, programmed to open automatically only in the afternoon. This was part of Philip's plan to buy more time. They immediately called the company's supervisor, who had the keys, but even then, they couldn't open the storage room door. Checking the surveillance footage, they saw chaos in the vault and knew something was terribly wrong. They called the police, reporting a major theft. The police responded quickly, and after hours of trying to open the door, they estimated the stolen amount to be $18.8 million, which brought the FBI into the case. Upon investigating the employees, it was discovered that Philip Johnson didn't exist in their records, as Philip had taken his file before fleeing with the truck. In North Carolina, Smith managed to break free from his handcuffs using a nail clipper and return to the city, confirming that Philip was the thief. He led the authorities to Philip's house, where they found Terry still held captive inside. The first lead came from a forest ranger in North Carolina, who reported seeing a white truck matching the description from the alert. But by the time the 65 FBI agents arrived, Philip had already fled on a bus heading out of the country. With little left to trace him, the police went to Philip's house to gather evidence. They found the place in disarray, with writings on the walls that reflected Philip's sadness and depression. During their search, they discovered a set of papers from 1992, which contained plans for a previous robbery at the same Loomis Fargo company. They also found a collection of fake IDs prepared using photos and stolen identities from his colleagues. Convinced that Philip was the robber, the police left the house with significant evidence. 5 months after his successful escape, Philip had fled to Mexico. However, he made a fatal mistake by re-entering the U.S. through Texas from Mexico. Customs officers stopped the bus carrying Philip, ordering all passengers to step out for routine inspection. Customs officer Virginia Rodriguez, who had just passed by Philip's wanted poster, didn't recognize him at first because he had lost weight, his hair had thinned, and his appearance had drastically changed. When asked why he had been to Mexico, Philip said he was visiting friends, but his nervousness raised suspicions. She asked for his ID. Philip didn't have an ID, so he handed over a North Carolina driver's license. Officer Rodriguez felt something was off, so she passed the ID to her colleague to run it through the National Crime Information Center. Meanwhile, she searched Philip's bag and found a bundle of cash amounting to $10,714. Moments later, her colleague returned, confirming that the name on the ID, Roger DeLauder, was linked to Philip Johnson, the fugitive. Finally, the FBI's top wanted criminal was in custody. The FBI, aware of the severity of Philip's crimes and the punishment he was likely to face, offered him a deal in exchange for revealing the location of the stolen money. But Philip refused to cooperate. Undeterred, the FBI took it upon themselves to find the money. They investigated the ID Philip had used and discovered that an apartment in Mexico City was rented under that name. Agents searched the apartment, but found no trace of the money. However, they did find a receipt in the trash from a storage facility called Mountain Home Warehouses. At 2 a.m. on September 17, 1997, FBI agents arrived at the storage facility mentioned in the receipt. They broke the lock and opened the gate, finding all the stolen money still in the company's original bags. Philip Johnson didn't stand trial, as all the evidence pointed directly at him. He was charged with kidnapping, armed robbery, and money laundering, and was sentenced to 25 years in a maximum security federal prison. However, Philip had already spent $100,000 of the stolen money, so the court ordered him to work inside the prison for even less than he was paid while free, to repay the full amount to Loomis Fargo.